Welcome friends. In this lecture we are going to have a look at bootloaders. Now we know that once the system gets booted up or it gets powered on, then first step is post, then the control is handed over to MBR, and in MBR we have got bootloaders, either GRUB, GRUB2 or other bootloaders. In this lecture we are primarily going to look at GRUB and GRUB2. Now GRUB has become legacy. It is no more used in later distributions, but it has been around for many years, and GRUB itself stands for grand. So grand, we take GR from grand and U from unified, so this U, and bootloader. So we take B from bootloader. And we also know that GRUB resides in the first block of the hard disk, which is of 512 bytes. So let me just put in bytes. And once the control is handed over to GRUB, GRUB looks into the boot directory to find out kernel related files, so that kernel then gets boot up or gets started and brings up all other system services. Now since GRUB has become legacy and GRUB2 is the new bootloader for most of the Linux distributions, and the difference between GRUB and GRUB2 is that GRUB2 supports loadable modules for specific file systems and modes of operation which were not present in GRUB legacy. If we look at the GRUB2 configuration file, we will see the command which is ins mode, which is short form for install module, and this is specific for GRUB2. We wouldn't find this command if we look at the configuration file of GRUB. So it should not be like that. I should bring it back and it should be like this. So this file or this command is in GRUB2 but is not available in legacy GRUB bootloaders. GRUB2 also supports conditional logical statements, and it means that if certain conditions are met, only then those modules should be loaded. So a very powerful loader and also enhanced features as compared to GRUB legacy. Now if we are talking about which distributions support GRUB and GRUB2, then if we talk about Enterprise Linux 6 and earlier versions, so Enterprise Linux 6 and earlier versions, it also covers CentOS as well. They all had GRUB as the default bootloader. And similarly for Ubuntu versions which were prior to 2009 releases, they also supported GRUB. But Enterprise Linux 7 and Ubuntu versions which are later than 2009, they all by default have GRUB2 as their default bootloader. There are some other Linux bootloaders. For example, one is ISO Linux, which is based on SysLinux. So SysLinux, and SysLinux itself, it is a series of BIOS based kernels. So BIOS based kernels. Another very famous bootloader in 1990s for Linux was Lilo or Linux Loader. But this one was replaced by GRUB because of its limited functionality, and it only works on BIOS based systems. So there was a variant for EFI systems which was called as eLilo. Now if we are talking about configuration files and how to configure GRUB, now let me remove the slide and start a new one. So if you are talking about the configuration files specifically for GRUB, because you might find it on earlier versions of Linux, then that configuration file is in boot/grub/menu.lst file. and in that menu.lst you will find entries that you may want to change depending upon your requirement, if you want to change to tweak or configure GRUB as per your needs. And once that file is changed, you might need to get it updated by typing in update or GRUB-update. Also, if you want to install GRUB for the first time, you would type in GRUB, so GRUB-install, and then the path of that particular drive where you want to install the GRUB, which would be, and it would not be the partition, since GRUB install in the first sector of the part of the boot partition, so it would be dev and whatever is the drive name, for example SD A or B or C, and not the partition number but the complete drive name over here. In case of GRUB2, so GRUB2, the files are more or less the same, but a little bit difference is there. For example, it could be boot GRUB, so this is GRUB, and GRUB.cfg. You may find these especially on Debian-based distributions, or on enterprise Linux-based distribution it could be boot/GRUB2 and GRUB.cfg. Now in case of GRUB2, we do not directly modify these files. Rather, if we want to make changes in the GRUB file, we make those changes in etc, then default, and then GRUB file. And once we make the changes in that GRUB file, we need to activate or implement those changes into these files, and we can do that by running in the command which is update -grub. Now this update grub, this in fact is a front end, and it calls the command which is the backend command, which is grub. So this is the grub2 dash make config. So this command is in fact called in once we use this command update grub, and we can give it the argument, for example space -o, and then the path where we want that configuration file to be saved. By default it replaces that file which is over here, but if we want to generate a separate file at a separate location, we can give the path over here. And just like it was a case in case of grub, we use the command grub install to install the grub. In case of grub2, we would use the command grub2 dash install. So now let's head over to the terminal and see some of these grub file and some of their parameters. So I am here at CentOS 7, which is Enterprise Linux 7. So in this system we wouldn't have grub, we would have grub2. And one of the ways to know that besides that menu.list file, we can also type in, let's say grub and grub dash install. Since we need the root privileges for that, so I can type in sudo grub install and then version, so that it shows us what is the version for that. Grub install command is not there, so let's type in grub2 dash install, and it shows that the version for grub is 2.02. Let's also have a look at the contents of boot directory, which is boot and then grub2, and afterwards I press enter, and we see that we have got this grub.cfg file. If we have a look at the contents of this file by typing in, let's say vi and then boot and then grub2 and then grub.cfg, you see that at the very top of this file it says that do not edit this file, because if we edit this file and we run the script update grub or update grub2, it will automatically be replaced by, our entries will automatically be replaced if we had changed them. So in order to change the entries, we need to make the changes in etc grub file. So let's head over to that file. Let's just get out of here and type in vi etc/default and grub. Now these are some of the entries that we can change. For example, we can change the timeout, the option that is given once we boot the system. The timeout is by default is 5, and grub default is saved. It means that whatever, if we are using like maybe multi-boot system, maybe we have got Windows operating system besides this Linux, then the state will be saved. For example, if we boot into Windows, then once we boot into Windows, then next time by default it will boot into Windows and not Linux. So that is this option. And there are some other options. For example, grub disable recovery is equal to true. So now let's try to edit this file. Let's just get out of there and do a sudo so that we can change the contents of this file. And let's just say that make the timeout to maybe 50 seconds. Just save it, get out of here, and now we need to update the grub. So I put in the command sudo grub2 make config and output the configuration file into boot and then grub2 and grub.cfg. So once we do that, it will generate the configuration file, and once it gets generated, if we reboot the system, we will see that the timeout option will be changed to 50 seconds. So let's reboot the system and see if the changes have taken effect. Let's just give it a while the system gets booted up. And indeed, now we see that in the bottom of the screen, the time has changed to 50 milliseconds. Now let's head over to Ubuntu and see the same thing over there as well, because there is a slight change and I just want to show you that. So here we are at Ubuntu box, and if I type in, let me just cancel this one. If I type in, let's say grub, then install, and then version, so we see that the output is shown as 1.99, although this is not 2, but this means that it is using GRUB2. Now if I come into the directory, let's say cd etc or cd boot, we see that there is no grub in there. If I do an ls over here, we see that there is no grub2 but only grub. So that's kind of confusing, that if it is using grub2, then why there is no directory by the name of grub2, but you can use this command to verify that it is using grub2. In fact, grub versions up till 0.97, they were all grub legacy, but after that, all the versions that have come after grub version 0.97, they are all grub version 2. So if we come into grub directory and do an ls, we see that we would find a file by the name of grub.cfg, which is, if I bring it up a little bit, which is over here. And also we see that there is no menu.list file, which is another indication that if it is using menu.list, which is for grub legacy. Now again, if we want to change the contents of this grub.cfg file, we would not do it directly over here. Rather, we would go to the path which is etc/default/grub, and over here we would make the changes as we like to. For example, we can change the timeout, we can change the hidden timeout, which means that if Ubuntu is the only operating system, then it will not give the timeout and simply boot into it. So we can change that option. By default it is 0. We can change it to, let's say, whatever value we want to set in. And also some other grub related parameters that you can set if you want to, but from LPIC certification point of view, this is not something that you will be asked for. You just need to know that there are two versions of grub and grub legacy, and what are some of the directories and their files that we can make the configuration changes, and also how to update the grub entries and how to install it. by using either GRUB2 make config or GRUB make config files. So let's just get out of this file, and that's all there is to it as far as the bootloaders are concerned. I hope you have learned from this video, and I would like to